Imagine a 5-year-old girl standing in a grand palace, dressed in gold and lace, her innocent eyes staring directly at you. A child so radiant that one of the greatest painters of the era captured her for eternity. But behind that luminous gaze lies a story far darker than any fairy tale. A life predetermined by politics, obsession, and a dynasty so obsessed with blood that it turned incest into policy. This is not a tale of princesses and ballrooms. This is the story of Margarita Teresa of Spain, a child raised to serve, to marry her uncle, to endure pregnancies that would destroy her, and ultimately to die, all for the sake of a dying empire. In the Prado Museum in Madrid hangs Diego Velázquez's Las Meninas, one of the most famous paintings in the world. At its center, Margarita Teresa, just 5 years old, stands radiant in her elaborate gown. To the casual observer, she is the very picture of innocence and royalty. But for those who know her story, that bright gaze is a haunting reminder of what awaited her. A princess born into the Habsburg dynasty, a family so consumed by the purity of their bloodline that close relative marriages were not just common, they were required. Margarita Teresa's parents were uncle and niece. Her future husband would be her uncle too. By the time she died at 21, she had endured 6 pregnancies, multiple miscarriages, and a life of unimaginable suffering. The House of Habsburg ruled Europe for centuries, mastering power through strategic marriages that kept wealth and influence tightly contained within the family. What started as political strategy became something far more sinister, a systematic practice of incest. Cousins, uncles, nieces. No relationship was off limits if it helped preserve the so-called purity of royal blood. The results were catastrophic. Physical deformities, intellectual disabilities, and chronic health problems became commonplace. The notorious Habsburg jaw, a protruding lower jaw caused by generations of inbreeding, became the visible symbol of the dynasty's growing decay. Born on July 12, 1651, in the Alcazar of Madrid, Margarita Teresa's arrival was celebrated not for the joy of new life, but for the political value she represented. Her father, Philip IV, a man burdened by the failures of his reign, and her mother, Mariana of Austria, herself a child bride and niece of Philip, had little personal connection with their daughter beyond duty. From the very first moment, Margarita Teresa was not a child. She was a tool of diplomacy, a commodity in the marriage market that stretched across Europe. Despite the cold calculations surrounding her existence, Margarita Teresa was intelligent, spirited, and unusually charismatic. She learned languages, displayed artistic talent, and had a natural charm that fascinated visitors to the court. These traits, however, increased her value as a political asset, rather than being nurtured for her own sake. Every meal, every lesson, every interaction was monitored. Her education emphasized languages, dance, and religion, but only in ways that would prepare her to serve the Austrian branch of the Habsburgs as a bride and mother of heirs. Courtiers and palace physicians alike treated her body like a machine to be calibrated for reproduction. By age 10, doctors were assessing her for future childbearing potential, examining her with a detachment that seems shocking today. Her life was meticulously documented, her personality and preferences deemed irrelevant. By the time Margarita Teresa was 11, negotiations were already underway for her marriage to Leopold I, Holy Roman Emperor, her uncle. At 12, the contract was finalized, with the actual ceremony scheduled for her 14th birthday. She had no voice in these decisions. Her days became filled with training in Austrian court customs, etiquette, and religious practices, preparing her to seamlessly fit into a foreign palace where her worth would be measured entirely in her fertility and compliance. At 14, Margarita Teresa left Spain, embarking on a months-long journey to Vienna with a massive entourage. Displayed in public as a symbol of alliance, she encountered curious crowds and foreign officials, yet experienced a profound isolation. By the time she reached Vienna, the full reality of her life as an empress and reproductive instrument was unavoidable. Her wedding by proxy took place in Madrid, her husband represented by an ambassador. A few weeks later, she met Leopold I in Vienna for the official ceremony. Witnesses described her as pale, silent, and obedient, performing the ritual with the mechanical precision imposed upon her. While the court celebrated the political success, Margarita Teresa's married life began immediately with the expectation of childbearing. Leopold, though described as kind, was part of the same system that valued her only for her ability to produce heirs. Court ladies oversaw her every movement, physicians monitored her cycle, and treated her body as if it were an agricultural plot to be optimized for reproduction. Emotional or psychological needs were ignored. Her first pregnancy began less than 3 months after the wedding. At 15, she miscarried, a devastating loss both physically and mentally. There was no time for mourning or recovery. The court pressed her toward another pregnancy immediately. Her second pregnancy also ended tragically. By the third, she successfully gave birth to a daughter, Maria Antonia, but the toll on her young body was profound. The cycle of conception, miscarriage, and forced recovery continued relentlessly. Each pregnancy was treated as a state enterprise, with advisors, physicians, and diplomats measuring her fertility against dynastic needs. She became increasingly frail, isolated, and depressed, her mental health deteriorating as her body bore the punishment of political ambition. Despite her suffering, the pressure never ceased. The Spanish Empire, already weakened and nearly bankrupt, needed heirs to sustain its dying power. Margarita Teresa's life was consumed entirely by reproductive expectations, leaving her trapped in a gilded prison of ceremonial obligations, constant surveillance, and personal sacrifice. In early 1672, Margarita Teresa became pregnant for the fifth time. Her body, worn from years of repeated pregnancies and miscarriages, began to fail. By March 1673, she went into premature labor. Both she and her child died in the process. She was only 21. Her death was not mourned for the human life lost. The court's focus was on political consequences and the search for Leopold's next wife to continue the reproductive mission. Margarita Teresa had begun. Her passing marked a turning point. The Spanish branch of the Habsburgs entered a succession crisis, accelerating the empire's decline. The dynasty that had sacrificed so many lives to maintain purity was now crumbling under the genetic consequences of its policies. Margarita Teresa's story is a stark illustration of the human cost of absolute power. The obsession with inbreeding and dynastic continuity led to generations of suffering and ultimately to the collapse of the Spanish Habsburg line. Her daughter, Maria Antonia, continued the cycle of early marriage and difficult pregnancies, inheriting both genetic challenges and the burden of political expectation. The dynasty's final blow came in the form of Charles II of Spain, Margarita Teresa's half-brother. So weakened by inbreeding that he could not produce heirs, he became a symbol of the failure of Habsburg policies. The War of Spanish Succession followed, a direct consequence of the human sacrifices made in the name of bloodline purity. Yet in Velázquez's Las Meninas, Margarita Teresa survives beyond her tragic fate. The painting captures her at 5 years old, the only moment in her life when she was free of dynastic pressure. Her gaze, direct and intelligent, reflects the potential that the world stole from her. Art historians see in this work a subtle critique of the court that molded her into a commodity. The luminous child in the painting endures, long after the empire and the dynasty that destroyed her have faded. Margarita Teresa's life forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about power, control, and the objectification of human life. She was a victim of a system that treated children as property, a human cost hidden behind the grandeur of palaces and ceremonies. Her story is remembered today, not for the children she bore or the alliances she forged, but for the human being she was, a luminous child, taken too soon, immortalized in art. Her gaze across centuries is a warning. No political ambition justifies the sacrifice of innocence and human dignity. Margarita Teresa may have died young, but in Velázquez's brushstrokes, she remains eternal. If you want more stories that reveal the shocking truths behind history's greatest dynasties, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't believe what comes next.